At our house, you got straight A's or you got a punishment. The report card arrived on a Wednesday in October, and I watched my little sister Mia's hands shake as she pulled it from her backpack. She was 10 years old, 4th grade, and the B+ in social studies sat there like a death sentence. I was 16, and I'd learned years ago to forge Mom's signature on anything below perfection before it ever reached her hands. But Mia hadn't figured that out yet. She still believed honesty mattered, that parents rewarded truth-telling. I tried to grab the envelope from her, but she pulled away, saying Mom would be proud of her other grades. 4 A's and 1 B+. Any normal parent would celebrate. Ours would see only failure. Mom came home at 6:30, still wearing her hospital scrubs with her name badge clipped to the pocket. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, pediatric surgeon. She saved children's lives for a living, then came home and destroyed her own kids' childhoods with systematic precision. She set her purse on the counter and asked about our day in that pleasant voice she used before she saw grades. Mia handed over the report card with trembling fingers, and I watched Mom's expression shift from neutral to cold in the space of a heartbeat. She didn't yell. That would have been easier somehow. Instead, she folded the paper carefully and asked Mia why she thought a B+ was acceptable. Mia tried explaining that social studies was hard this year, that they were learning about the Revolutionary War, and she'd struggled with all the dates and battles. Mom listened with her head tilted slightly, that clinical expression she probably used when delivering bad news to patients' families. When Mia finished, Mom walked to the kitchen junk drawer and pulled out the wooden ruler we all knew too well. She told Mia to hold out her hands, palms up. My sister started crying before the first strike landed. 5 hits per hand, hard enough to leave red welts that would fade to purple by morning. I stood in the doorway, feeling sick and useless, knowing if I intervened, it would only make things worse for both of us. After the punishment, Mom sent Mia to her room to study social studies for 3 hours with no dinner. She turned to me and asked to see my progress report from my junior year classes. I got all A's, like always, but she examined each grade carefully as if searching for the slightest imperfection. My A in AP chemistry was a 94%, and she asked why it wasn't higher. I explained that the class average was an 82, that a 94 was exceptional. She said exceptional wasn't good enough when you were capable of perfection. Then she took away my car privileges for a week, saying I'd clearly been wasting time that should have been spent studying. Dad got home around 8, late from his accounting firm like usual. He worked 70-hour weeks during tax season, and the rest of the year he worked 60. Mom ran the household, made all decisions about us kids, and Dad just nodded along with whatever she decreed. That night, he asked why Mia wasn't at dinner, and Mom explained the B+ situation. Dad glanced at me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe sympathy, maybe regret. But he didn't argue with Mom's methods. He never did. He just cut his chicken and changed the subject to property taxes. Later that night, I snuck food from the kitchen and brought it to Mia's room. She was sitting at her desk with her social studies textbook open, tears still wet on her cheeks. Her palms were swollen and hot to the touch. I gave her the sandwich and apple slices I'd hidden in my hoodie pocket, and she ate quickly, terrified Mom would catch us. She asked me why Mom hated her. I tried explaining that Mom didn't hate her, that Mom was just obsessed with success and achievement. But even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. What kind of love looked like this? What kind of mother marked her children's worth by letter grades? The next morning, Mia could barely hold her pencil. Her teacher, Ms. Lawson, noticed and asked what happened. Mia lied, saying she'd fallen off her bike and caught herself with her hands. I know because Mia told me later, crying in my room about how the lies were piling up. Ms. Lawson accepted the explanation but made a note in her planner. I saw it when I picked Mia up from school that day, the way the teacher watched us leave with concern in her expression. But she didn't call anyone or file a report. Teachers never wanted to believe that Dr. Holbrook, respected surgeon and PTA volunteer, could hurt her own kids. Our house operated on a system of absolute academic tyranny, disguised as high expectations. Mom had charts on the refrigerator tracking our grades, our test scores, our class rankings. She'd mapped out our entire educational trajectories before we'd even started elementary school. I would go to MIT or Stanford for engineering. Mia would follow Mom into medicine, probably pediatrics, continuing the family legacy. Our younger brother Oliver, who was 7, would do something equally impressive, though Mom hadn't decided what yet. None of us had been consulted about these plans. Our dreams, our interests, our actual talents didn't matter. Only the grades mattered. Only the achievements that looked good on college applications. The punishments escalated with age and grade level. When I was Mia's age, a B meant being grounded for a week and losing screen time. By middle school, B's meant physical punishment and academic boot camp, which involved studying from the moment I got home until bedtime, with no breaks except bathroom and dinner. High school had added new layers. Now, anything below an A meant losing privileges I'd earned. Public humiliation during family dinners, where Mom would discuss my failures in detail, and mandatory tutoring sessions with graduate students Mom hired to correct my deficiencies. She never hit me anymore after I turned 14 and got taller than her. But the psychological warfare had intensified to compensate. Oliver was still young enough that Mom's expectations hadn't fully crystallized into cruelty yet. He got away with B's in first grade because Mom said elementary school was just foundation building. But I'd watched her system evolve with each of us kids, and I knew Oliver's grace period was temporary. In a few years, he'd face the same impossible standards, the same punishments for being anything less than perfect. The thought made me sick. I'd survived this long by being naturally good at school, by having the right kind of brain for memorization and test-taking. But Oliver was different, more creative and scattered, the kind of kid who'd struggle with rigid academic structures. When Mom turned her full attention to him, he'd break. My best friend Caleb knew some of what happened at home, but not all of it. I'd mentioned the pressure and the punishments in vague terms, but never showed him the bruises on Mia's hands, or described Mom's coldness in detail. His parents were divorced and chaotic in their own way, lots of yelling and drama, but they didn't hit their kids over grades. When I'd stayed at his house for a weekend last year, his mom had laughed about his C in algebra and told him to try harder next semester. Just like that. No punishment, no consequences, just casual encouragement. I felt like I was visiting another planet where parents were actual human beings instead of achievement-obsessed tyrants. In November, Mia got another B, this time in math. She'd scored an 87 on a test about long division, dragging her overall grade down from an A- to a B+. Mom found out on a Friday evening when she checked the online grade portal she monitored obsessively. This time the punishment was worse because Mom said Mia should have learned from the social studies incident. 5 strikes with the ruler on each hand again, but then Mom made Mia copy multiplication tables for 2 hours straight, writing with those injured hands, until the paper was smudged with tears and sweat. I could hear my sister crying through the walls, and I sat in my room with my headphones on, blasting music to drown out the sound of her suffering. That weekend, I decided I had to do something. I couldn't watch this happen anymore without at least trying to intervene. On Saturday morning, when Mom went to the gym, I sat down with Dad at the kitchen table and told him everything. How Mia's hands were constantly swollen and bruised, how she was having nightmares about failing tests, how I'd been forging signatures and hiding bad grades for years out of pure survival instinct. Dad listened with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, frozen in place. When I finished, he set the cup down carefully and said Mom was doing what she thought was best. He said we lived in a competitive world, that Mom's methods came from love, that one day we'd thank her for pushing us so hard. I lost it. I told Dad that love didn't look like welts and terror, that Mom was abusing us, that social services would call it child abuse if anyone official ever found out. Dad's face went red, and he stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He said I was being dramatic and disrespectful, that I didn't understand the sacrifices Mom had made for her career, the pressure she faced every day saving lives. He said if I kept talking like this, he'd tell Mom I was trying to turn the family against her. The threat hung between us like a blade. I left the kitchen shaking, realizing Dad wasn't a potential ally. He was Mom's enabler, too invested in maintaining the status quo to admit what was happening under his own roof. At school on Monday, I watched Mia during lunch from across the cafeteria. She sat alone at the end of a table, barely touching her food, her hands moving stiffly as she tried to open her milk carton. Other kids ignored her, or maybe they sensed something was wrong and didn't know how to help. She'd become isolated over the past year as Mom's punishments intensified. No time for friends when every afternoon was consumed by mandatory study sessions. No sleepovers or birthday parties when her worth was measured entirely in grades. I thought about approaching her, but I had my own friends at my own table, and walking over would draw attention neither of us wanted. After school, I had SAT prep with one of Mom's hired tutors, a graduate student from the university named David Nguyen. He was 24, studying for his PhD in applied mathematics, and he seemed uncomfortable with the intensity of Mom's requirements. She'd given him a detailed curriculum and a list of my weaknesses, demanding he focus on bringing my math score from a 780 to an 800. David worked with me twice a week for 90-minute sessions in our dining room while Mom hovered nearby, monitoring his teaching methods. He was patient and actually helpful, but the whole arrangement felt performative, like Mom had hired him more to demonstrate her commitment to my success than because I actually needed the help. During one session in late November, David asked quietly if everything was okay at home. Mom had stepped away to take a phone call, and he'd noticed how tense I got whenever she entered the room. I wanted to tell him everything, to ask for help, but fear stopped me. What if he told Mom what I'd said? What if it made things worse? So I just nodded and said everything was fine. We just had high expectations in our family. He looked at me for a long moment, like he could see through the lie, but he didn't push. He went back to explaining algebra concepts, and the moment passed. Another adult who saw something wrong but didn't intervene because it was easier to look away. Thanksgiving arrived and brought extended family to our house. Mom's parents, my grandparents who lived 3 hours away, and Mom's younger sister Diane with her 2 kids. Diane's children were average students, B's and C's mostly, and they seemed happy and relaxed in a way my siblings and I never were. During dinner, my grandmother asked about our grades, and Mom presented our report cards like trophies. She emphasized my perfect GPA and Mia's improvement in social studies, glossing over the B in math. My Aunt Diane made some comment about how we must be naturally smart, and Mom corrected her sharply, saying intelligence was only part of success, that discipline and consequences built character. The way she said consequences made my stomach turn. After dinner, Mia and our cousins went to play video games in the basement. I stayed upstairs helping clean up, and I overheard Diane talking to Mom in the kitchen. She mentioned that Mia seemed anxious and asked if everything was okay. Mom's voice went cold as she explained her parenting philosophy, how the world didn't reward mediocrity, how she was preparing us for real life where performance mattered. Diane tried suggesting that 4th graders should be allowed to be kids, that grades weren't everything. Mom shut her down immediately, saying that kind of permissive parenting was why Diane's kids were underachievers. The conversation ended badly, with Diane excusing herself to check on her children. The family left early the next morning, and we never talked about Thanksgiving again. December brought final exams, and Mom's expectations reached fever pitch. She created a study schedule that accounted for every hour of every day, including weekends. I had 4 AP classes and 2 honors courses, all requiring comprehensive final exams. Mia had her first real finals in fourth grade, just basic subject tests, but Mom treated them like college boards. Oliver was too young for exams, but Mom started preparing him anyway, drilling him on sight words and arithmetic facts. Our house became a pressure cooker of academic anxiety where the only conversations were about studying and scores and meeting benchmarks. I got sick 2 weeks before finals, just a bad cold, but it wiped me out for 3 days. Mom refused to let me stay home from school because I'd miss review sessions. She loaded me up with cold medicine and sent me to class with a fever, telling me to power through because successful people didn't let illness interfere with performance. I sat through AP chemistry, barely able to focus, my head pounding, and failed a practice test for the first time all semester. When Mom saw the score, a 68%, she didn't care that I'd been sick. She just saw the number and implemented an emergency study protocol that involved me studying until 2 in the morning for the next week straight. The sleep deprivation started affecting me in ways I couldn't control. I'd fall asleep in class, jolt awake during practice problems, lose track of what teachers were saying mid-lecture. My grades didn't slip because I was still performing okay on actual graded work, but I felt myself unraveling. My hands would shake when I held pencils. I'd stare at textbook pages, and the words would blur together into meaningless shapes. I started having panic attacks in bathroom stalls between classes, hyperventilating into my hands while trying not to make noise. Caleb noticed and asked what was wrong, but I couldn't explain the depth of it. How do you tell someone that your own mother is systematically destroying you in the name of success? Mia's situation grew worse. She failed a practice quiz in math, getting a 56%, and Mom completely lost it. She didn't just use the ruler this time. She made Mia kneel on uncooked rice in the corner of the kitchen for an hour while she cooked dinner. It's an old punishment Mom had learned about from some article about traditional discipline methods. The rice digs into your knees, creating intense pain without leaving obvious bruises. I watched my little sister crying silently in the corner, her legs trembling, while Mom calmly chopped vegetables and talked about how pain built character. Dad walked through, saw what was happening, and left the room without a word. That night, I took photos of Mia's knees. They were covered in small red indentations and starting to bruise. I didn't know what I'd do with the pictures yet, but some instinct told me to document everything. I'd started keeping a journal weeks ago, writing down every punishment, every incident, every moment of cruelty. The notebook stayed hidden in the back of my closet behind old shoeboxes. If anyone found it, I'd be dead. But I couldn't stop recording what was happening. Couldn't stop gathering evidence of something I didn't yet know how to fight. Finals week arrived like an execution date. I took 6 exams over 4 days, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep per night and whatever energy drinks I could sneak without Mom noticing. She didn't allow caffeine because she said it was a crutch for the undisciplined. Everything felt surreal and distant, like I was watching myself take tests from outside my body. I must have performed adequately because I don't remember any disasters. Just the blur of bubbling in Scantron sheets and writing essays with hands that cramped and shook. When it was finally over, Mom didn't let us rest. She immediately started us on winter break study plans, saying we couldn't afford to lose momentum. Christmas was barely a celebration. We opened presents for an hour on Christmas morning, then spent the rest of the day studying. Mom had bought us educational gifts, science kits and advanced math workbooks and college prep guides. The only non-academic present I got was a new calculator. Mia received flashcard sets for every subject. Oliver got learning tablets loaded with educational apps. We thanked Mom with appropriate enthusiasm, while dying a little inside. That evening, Diane called to wish us Merry Christmas, and I overheard her arguing with Mom about letting us have 1 day off. Mom hung up on her. In January, report cards arrived, and I'd maintained my perfect 4.0 GPA despite everything. Mom examined my grades with satisfaction, then actually smiled at me for the first time in months. She said she was proud that I was proving what was possible with proper discipline and dedication. The praise felt hollow and wrong, like being congratulated for surviving torture. Mia got mostly A's, but another B+ in math, and the cycle of punishment started again. This time, Mom added a new consequence, making Mia write "I will work harder" 500 times by hand before bed. My sister was up until midnight completing the assignment, her handwriting deteriorating into barely legible scrawls by the end. I started researching child abuse laws online, using incognito mode and clearing my browser history obsessively. I learned about mandatory reporters, people legally required to report suspected abuse, teachers, doctors, counselors. But I also learned how hard it was to prove abuse when it didn't leave obvious scars, when the abuser was a respected professional, when the victims were too afraid to speak up. I read stories of kids who reported their parents and ended up in foster care, separated from siblings, bounced between homes. The system was supposed to protect children, but it seemed just as likely to traumatize them further. I didn't know what to do with this information, just filed it away in my brain next to all the other impossible knowledge I carried. February brought a new crisis. Mia's math teacher requested a parent conference, concerned about Mia's anxiety and the way she'd started having meltdowns during tests. Mom went to the meeting with her professional demeanor, her doctor's authority, her practiced explanations. She told the teacher that Mia was just adjusting to higher academic standards, that some children needed extra pressure to reach their potential. The teacher suggested reducing homework load and considering counseling for test anxiety. Mom thanked her politely and did absolutely nothing different at home. In fact, she increased Mia's study time, saying the teacher's concern proved Mia wasn't working hard enough to hide her struggles. I finally broke down in front of Caleb at school. We were sitting in his car after classes, and he was talking about some party that weekend. I just started crying, couldn't stop, all the pressure and fear and exhaustion pouring out in ugly sobs. Caleb looked terrified, then hugged me awkwardly and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. about the beatings and the rice and the impossible standards, about Mia's broken hands and Oliver's approaching doom, about Dad's complicity and Mom's cold perfectionism. Caleb listened with his mouth hanging open, looking shocked and lost. When I finished, he said I had to tell someone, a teacher or counselor or the police. I explained why I couldn't, why it would make everything worse. He argued with me for an hour, but eventually gave up, just promising he'd be there if I needed him. That night, I lay in bed thinking about escape. I was 16, still 2 years from legal adulthood. Mia was only 10, Oliver 7. Even if I could run away, what about them? They'd be left alone with Mom, facing even worse consequences for my betrayal. The thought paralyzed me. I couldn't save myself without abandoning them, but I couldn't save them while trapped in the same cage. The impossibility of it circled in my brain until exhaustion dragged me under into nightmares about failing tests and Mom's disappointed face. In March, I got a 92 on an AP English essay, my first grade below 95 all year. The teacher had written that my analysis was strong, but my thesis needed refinement. It was constructive criticism, the kind meant to help me improve. Mom saw only the number. She took away my phone for 2 weeks and scheduled extra tutoring sessions with David, even though English wasn't his subject. During our next session, David asked to see the essay. He read it carefully and told me it was excellent work, that the teacher's feedback was actually praise wrapped in suggestions. He said the 92 was nothing to be ashamed of. His kindness made me want to cry, this stranger showing me more support than my own mother. David started asking more questions about home life during our sessions. He'd noticed the exhaustion, the anxiety, the way I flinched when Mom called my name. He'd seen Mia's hands and Oliver's fearful silence. One day, he asked directly if Mom was hurting us. I froze, terrified of answering but desperate to tell someone who might actually help. The words stuck in my throat, years of conditioning and fear making it impossible to speak. David waited patiently, and finally I nodded once, a tiny movement that felt like jumping off a cliff. He closed his textbook and asked if I'd ever told any adults at school. I shook my head. He said I needed to, that what I described sounded like abuse, that there were people who could intervene. The next week, David stopped showing up for our sessions. Mom was furious, calling him multiple times and leaving increasingly angry voicemails. He finally replied via email, saying he was uncomfortable with the family dynamic and was terminating his tutoring services effective immediately. Mom was livid, ranting about unprofessional behavior and wasted money. But I knew what had really happened. David had seen too much, gotten too close to the truth, and removed himself before he'd be forced to decide whether to report what he suspected. Another adult who chose personal comfort over protecting kids in danger. I didn't blame him exactly, but the abandonment stung anyway. April arrived with state-standardized testing, and Mom's anxiety infected the entire house. She woke us at 5 in the morning for test prep, drilled us through breakfast, sent us to school with protein bars and water bottles like we were heading into battle. The actual tests were anticlimactic after all that. Build up. I finished most sections early and sat there wondering if I'd bubbled incorrectly or if they were genuinely easier than Mom's expectations suggested. Mia struggled with the math portions, emerging from her testing room with red eyes and shaking hands. That night, Mom made her complete extra math worksheets as punishment for poor performance, even though we wouldn't get results for weeks. Caleb invited me to his lake house for spring break, and for one beautiful moment, I thought I might escape for a few days. His family was leaving on Friday morning and wanted me to come along. I asked Mom as casually as possible, already knowing her answer. She said no, without even looking up from her medical journal. Spring break was for studying and getting ahead on next semester's material, not for playing around at some lake house. When I tried to argue that I'd maintained my GPA and deserved a break, she reminded me that deserving implied entitlement, and entitled children became mediocre adults. The conversation ended there. Caleb texted later asking what happened, and I lied and said something came up with family obligations. During spring break, while Caleb posted photos of swimming and bonfires, I sat at our dining room table, working through college-level textbooks Mom had purchased to challenge me. She decided I should start learning calculus, even though I wouldn't take the class until next year. The material was dense and confusing without a teacher, and I struggled through it alone while Mom checked my progress every few hours. Mia spent her break relearning entire units of fourth-grade curriculum, and Oliver was subjected to kindergarten readiness workbooks, even though he was already in first grade. We were prisoners in our own home, serving sentences for the crime of being born to a woman who viewed her children as achievement projects instead of actual human beings. In May, my school counselor called me out of class for a meeting I hadn't scheduled. Mr. Gregory Chen had been my counselor since freshman year, and I'd never talked to him about anything serious. He asked how things were going at home, how I was handling stress, whether I had support systems in place. The questions felt loaded, deliberate. I gave vague, positive answers, saying everything was fine, just normal academic pressure. He watched me carefully and mentioned that some of my teachers had noticed changes in my behavior this year. Increased anxiety, visible exhaustion, social withdrawal. He wanted to make sure I wasn't struggling with something I needed help managing. I realized someone must have said something, maybe David before he quit, maybe one of my teachers. Fear flooded through me, and I doubled down on the lies, insisting I was just focused on maintaining my grades and preparing for college applications next year. Mr. Chen let me go, but asked me to check in with him weekly. I agreed to avoid suspicion, then spent the next few days terrified that he'd call my parents or dig deeper into our home situation. But nothing happened. The system moved slowly, or maybe he'd believed my lies, or maybe he'd made a note in my file and was waiting for more evidence. I couldn't know, could only continue pretending everything was normal while my insides twisted with constant fear. That weekend, Mom announced we'd be doing family portrait photos. She hired a professional photographer and made us dress in coordinated outfits, navy and white, looking like a catalog family. We smiled on command, arranged ourselves in posed groupings, played the role of perfect high-achieving children with loving parents. The photographer commented on what a beautiful family we were, and Mom beamed with pride. She ordered the largest package, planning to hang the photos throughout the house and send them to family members. Looking at the proofs later, I saw the lie captured in glossy prints. The forced smiles and dead eyes, the tension in our shoulders, the way none of us touched each other naturally. But Mom saw only what she wanted to see, evidence of her successful family to display for the world. June brought end-of-year grades and another perfect report card for me. All A's, GPA still flawless, class rank still #1. Mom celebrated by taking us to dinner at an expensive restaurant, one of the few times she showed public affection. But even during dinner, she was planning my summer. Specialized math camp for 3 weeks, advanced placement prep courses, volunteer work at the hospital to build my resume. No time for relaxation or friends or any normal teenage activities. My summer was already mapped out in 30-minute increments, every moment optimized for college application purposes. Mia finished 4th grade with mostly A's and 1 final B in math. Mom declared the grade unacceptable and signed her up for intensive summer tutoring, 5 days a week, 3 hours per day. My little sister would spend her summer vacation at academic boot camp, while other kids swam and played and had actual childhoods. I watched her pack her backpack that first Monday of summer with textbooks and notebooks, her small shoulders slumped with defeat, and I felt rage building in my chest. This wasn't parenting. This was systematic destruction of childhood, erasing joy and play in favor of relentless achievement. And I was complicit in it, surviving while my siblings suffered, too afraid to risk everything by fighting back. Math camp turned out to be intensive and actually engaging. The other students were mostly kids like me, academically strong and parent-pressured, though maybe not to the same extreme. I made friends with a girl named Sophie Brennan, who was there by choice, actually enjoying advanced mathematics. She talked about numbers like they were beautiful puzzles, finding genuine joy in proofs and theorems. Spending time with her reminded me that learning could be voluntary and fun, that academic success didn't have to come through torture. We exchanged numbers and started texting. Nothing romantic, just friendship, but even that felt rebellious somehow. Mom hadn't approved this relationship, didn't know about these text conversations, couldn't control who I was becoming away from her surveillance. Sophie noticed things, though, the way I never wanted to talk about family, how I'd get anxious around 4 o'clock when camp ended and I had to go home. One day, she asked directly if my parents were strict, and I gave a careful answer about high expectations and academic pressure. She shared that her parents pushed her too, but when she described their pressure, it sounded gentle and supportive compared to mine. Her mom encouraged her interests in math. My mom demanded perfection in every subject regardless of interest or aptitude. The difference was fundamental, but I couldn't explain it without revealing too much. At home, Mia was deteriorating under the weight of summer tutoring. The tutor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Sheffield, was actually kind and patient, but 3 hours of math daily was breaking my sister. She'd come home exhausted and crying, begging Mom to let her quit. Mom refused, saying Mia needed to overcome her weakness in mathematics now, before it became a permanent limitation. I tried advocating for Mia, suggesting maybe lighter tutoring or breaks between sessions. Mom shut me down immediately, reminding me that I didn't make parenting decisions, that my opinion on Mia's education was irrelevant. The dismissal stung, but worse was watching Mia give up, seeing her stop fighting and just accept the misery as her normal reality. In July, I attended a 3-day workshop on college admission strategies that Mom had enrolled me in. The workshop was full of stressed parents and exhausted students, everyone performing academic anxiety like a competitive sport. The counselors running the workshop talked about building narratives and showcasing passion and demonstrating leadership. They emphasized authenticity and genuine interest. I sat there thinking about how impossible that advice was when your entire life had been curated by a parent who viewed your achievements as extensions of her own success. What were my genuine interests? What did I actually care about beyond survival and protecting my siblings? I had no idea. Mom had optimized me so thoroughly that I disappeared somewhere along the way. During lunch break, I overheard 2 parents talking about their daughter's mental health struggles and how they'd pulled back on academic pressure after her suicide attempt. They discussed therapy and medication and learning to prioritize well-being over achievement. I wanted to record the conversation, to play it for Mom, to make her hear what she was doing to us, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Mom would say those were weak parents making excuses for underachieving children. She'd use the story as a warning about what happened when you didn't maintain high standards. In her worldview, you either pushed through or you failed. There was no middle ground, no concept of sustainable success, no acknowledgement that humans needed rest and joy and space to exist beyond their accomplishments. August brought my 17th birthday and college application season. Mom had created a spreadsheet of schools ranked by prestige and probability of admission. MIT was the target, Stanford the backup, several Ivy League schools as additional options. She'd researched every requirement, every essay prompt, every recommendation letter guideline. My job was to execute her vision flawlessly. We spent my birthday working on the Common App essay, Mom reading over my shoulder and criticizing every sentence. The essay was supposed to reveal something meaningful about my character, but how could I write honestly about becoming a person under my mother's regime of control and perfection? I wrote what she wanted to hear. A story about overcoming challenges through discipline and determination, leaving out every true thing about my life. School started in late August, and I began my senior year carrying the weight of college applications like a physical burden. Early decision applications were due in November, which gave me roughly 10 weeks to perfect every element of my applications. Mom scheduled daily review sessions where we'd sit at the dining room table and she'd critique my essays word by word. She hired another tutor, a college admissions specialist named Dr. Marissa Frost, who charged $300 per hour to review my materials and provide strategic advice. Dr. Frost was professional, but clearly uncomfortable with Mom's intensity. After our third session, she pulled me aside and asked if I was okay, if the pressure was manageable. I lied automatically, saying I was fine, that I wanted this as much as Mom did. She didn't look convinced, but didn't push further. Mia started 5th grade traumatized from her summer of math tutoring and fell behind immediately in all her classes. Her teachers reached out to Mom concerned about Mia's lack of focus and emotional regulation. Mom responded by increasing tutoring and implementing even stricter study schedules at home. I watched my sister disappearing into herself, becoming quiet and withdrawn, losing the spark that had made her Mia. She stopped talking at dinner, stopped crying during punishments, just accepted everything with blank resignation. The change terrified me more than the crying had. When someone stops fighting, they're not recovering. They're giving up. In September, Mia's 5th grade teacher, Ms. Reeves, called Mom requesting another conference. This time, she brought the school counselor, Mrs. Diana Foster, who explained that Mia was showing signs of severe anxiety and possibly depression. They recommended professional mental health evaluation and suggested reducing academic pressure at home. Mom became defensive, arguing that Mia was just manipulating adults to avoid hard work. She dismissed the suggestion of therapy as unnecessary medicalization of normal childhood stress. The meeting ended badly, with Ms. Reeves and Mrs. Foster exchanging concerned looks, while Mom gathered her things with barely contained anger. That night, Mom punished Mia for embarrassing the family by complaining to school staff. She made Mia write an apology letter to her teacher and counselor explaining that she was fine and that any concerns were misunderstandings. Then Mom supervised while Mia rewrote the letter 5 times until it was perfectly composed and completely dishonest. Watching my 10-year-old sister craft lies to protect our mother from consequences made me physically sick. I excused myself to the bathroom and threw up, then sat on the cold tile floor wondering how much longer I could survive in this house without completely breaking. Oliver, now 7 and in 2nd grade, was starting to show signs of the same breaking I'd seen in Mia. He'd developed a nervous tic, blinking rapidly when stressed, and his teachers mentioned it during conferences. Mom dismissed it as attention-seeking behavior and implemented consequences for the blinking, as if he could control it. She made him stand in front of a mirror and practice not blinking until his eyes watered with effort. The cruelty of it, punishing a child for an involuntary stress response, revealed something fundamentally broken in Mom's psychology. She couldn't see us as people anymore, only as projects that needed correction and optimization. My SAT scores came back in late September, a perfect 1600. Mom's reaction was muted satisfaction, like I'd simply performed an expected task. She mentioned it to her colleagues at the hospital with pride, but showed no joy toward me directly. The score was just another box checked on her success matrix, another data point proving her parenting methods worked. She didn't ask how I felt about it, whether I was proud, what it meant to me personally. Just moved on immediately to ACT prep because apparently one perfect standardized test score wasn't enough. I needed to dominate all the standardized tests, leaving no room for colleges to question my qualifications. Caleb threw a party in early October to celebrate our senior year and upcoming college applications. I didn't ask Mom for permission because I knew she'd say no. Instead, I told her I was going to the library for a group study session and went to Caleb's house. For 3 hours, I pretended to be a normal teenager. I talked to Sophie Brennan, who went to a different school but knew Caleb through math competitions. I drank exactly 1 beer very slowly, tasting the rebellion. I laughed at stupid jokes and took photos with friends and felt the temporary illusion of freedom. Then, at exactly 9:30, I left to make it home by my curfew, and the weight of my real life settled back onto my shoulders like a concrete blanket. Mom somehow found out about the party. Maybe she checked the location data on my phone. Maybe someone's parent mentioned it. Maybe she just sensed the lie. She was waiting when I got home, sitting in the darkened living room like a villain in a thriller movie. She asked how the library study session went, and I maintained the lie until she pulled out her phone and showed me location data proving I'd been at Caleb's house. The betrayal on her face was genuine and terrible, like I'd committed an unforgivable sin by trying to have one night of normal teenage life. She grounded me indefinitely, took my car keys and phone, and scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Frost to discuss my concerning behavior and lack of focus. The punishment extended beyond just grounding. Mom created a new rule that I had to study in the living room where she could see me at all times. No more privacy in my room. She began checking my school bag every morning and night, looking for evidence of additional deceptions. She called Caleb's mother and told her I was no longer allowed to associate with her son, painting me as troubled, and Caleb as a bad influence. My social life, already minimal, completely evaporated under the new restrictions. I was isolated and monitored constantly, my every movement tracked and controlled. The house that had always been a prison now became solitary confinement. Mia watched all this happen and somehow concluded she needed to be even more perfect to avoid similar consequences. She began studying until 2 or 3 in the morning, surviving on a few hours of sleep. Her grades actually improved, all A's in every subject, but the cost was visible in her hollow eyes and increasingly skeletal frame. She was losing weight because she was too anxious to eat, her body consuming itself as fuel for endless academic performance. I tried talking to her, tried convincing her to ease up, but she'd just shake her head and say she couldn't fail, couldn't disappoint Mom, couldn't end up punished like me. In late October, I submitted my early decision application to MIT with an essay that was technically perfect and emotionally fraudulent. Mom read the final version 3 times, made minor edits, then declared it acceptable. We clicked submit together, her hand over mine on the mouse, a gesture that probably felt maternal to her, but felt like ownership to me. The application was strong. Perfect GPA, perfect test scores, excellent recommendations, volunteer work at the hospital, math competition awards. On paper, I was exactly what MIT wanted. In reality, I was a broken kid who didn't even know if he wanted to study engineering or if that was just another thing Mom had decided for me. November brought a new crisis. Mia collapsed at school during gym class. Just fell down mid-lap, unconscious before she hit the ground. The school called an ambulance and Mom met them at the hospital. I found out when the school called me to the office and explained what happened. They let me leave early to go to the hospital, where I found Mom in doctor mode, talking to the ER physicians with professional authority, while Mia lay on a gurney looking tiny and fragile. The diagnosis was severe exhaustion and malnutrition. The ER doctor, someone who didn't know Mom personally, asked pointed questions about Mia's sleep schedule and eating habits that clearly implied concern about neglect. Mom deflected smoothly, explaining that Mia was a perfectionist who pushed herself too hard, that they were working with her on finding balance. The ER doctor looked skeptical, but couldn't prove anything from one incident. He recommended rest, proper nutrition, and less academic pressure. He also suggested a psychiatric evaluation for anxiety. Mom agreed to everything while at the hospital, then did absolutely nothing once we got home. She told Mia the collapse was embarrassing and resulted from poor self-care, not acknowledging that she was the one who'd created the conditions for that collapse. Mia was given 1 day of rest, then the regular schedule resumed immediately. That weekend, I made a decision. I couldn't keep watching this happen, couldn't keep being complicit through my silence. I needed to tell someone with actual authority, someone who'd be legally required to act. On Monday morning, I asked to speak with Mr. Chen, my school counselor. He cleared his schedule and brought me into his office, closing the door. I sat in the chair across from his desk, feeling my heart pound against my ribs, knowing I was about to blow up my entire life. Then I started talking. I told him everything, about the ruler and the rice and the impossible standards, about Mia's collapse and Oliver's tic and my own exhaustion, about Dad's complicity and Mom's systematic abuse disguised as high expectations, about the isolation and the punishments and the constant fear. I showed him photos on my phone of Mia's bruised hands and knees. I showed him my journal with years of documentation. I cried through most of it, words pouring out between sobs, finally giving voice to the truth I'd hidden for so long. Mr. Chen listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he explained that as a mandatory reporter, he was required by law to report suspected child abuse to Child Protective Services. He asked if I understood what that meant, what would happen next. I nodded, terrified but also relieved. He asked if I was safe going home today, and I said probably, that Mom's abuse was calculated and rarely explosive. He made notes, then picked up his phone and called CPS while I sat there shaking. The conversation was brief and professional, him explaining the situation and giving my information. When he hung up, he said someone would be calling me soon to conduct an investigation. He said I was brave for coming forward, that I'd done the right thing. It didn't feel brave. It felt like detonating a bomb that would destroy everyone in its radius, including me. CPS called my cell phone during lunch. The caseworker, a woman named Laura Simmons, asked if we could meet after school somewhere private. I suggested the public library, neutral territory where Mom wouldn't think to look for me. Laura agreed and said to bring any documentation I had. I spent the rest of the school day in a fog of terror and adrenaline, barely hearing my teachers, just counting down minutes until the meeting. Caleb found me between classes and asked if I was okay, and I told him what I'd done. He looked shocked and worried but supportive, offering to come with me to the library for backup. I said no, that this was something I had to do alone, but thanked him for caring. Laura Simmons was maybe 40, professional but warm, with kind eyes that made me feel slightly less terrified. We sat at a table in the back corner of the library, and she recorded our conversation on a small device after asking my permission. She asked detailed questions about specific incidents, dates, injuries, witnesses. I walked her through years of abuse, showing her photos and journal entries. She asked about Mia's hospital visit and Oliver's tic, making notes on everything. The interview lasted over 2 hours, exhaustive and exhausting. When we finished, Laura explained that she'd be conducting home visits and interviewing my siblings separately at school. She said the investigation could take weeks, that I should try to act normal at home to avoid alerting Mom that I'd reported her. She gave me her card and said to call immediately if anything escalated or if I felt unsafe. Going home that night was surreal. Mom asked about my day in her usual clipped tone, and I gave my usual minimal answers. Mia was at the table studying, Oliver was working on reading homework, Dad was late from work like always. Everything looked normal on the surface, the same routine we'd performed for years, but underneath, everything had changed. I'd set forces in motion that couldn't be stopped. Either CPS would find enough evidence to protect us, or Mom would find out I'd reported her and my life would become exponentially worse. I ate dinner in silence, went to the living room to study where Mom could monitor me, and counted the hours until Laura would start her investigation. The next day, Laura showed up at school during lunch and interviewed Mia. My sister came to find me afterward, crying and terrified. She said a social worker had asked her about punishments and grades and whether she felt safe at home. Mia had tried to lie, to protect Mom out of fear, but Laura had shown her the photos I'd provided and asked specific questions about her hands and knees. Eventually, Mia had confirmed the abuse, crying through the whole interview. She was terrified Mom would find out, convinced she'd be punished forever for telling the truth. I held her while she sobbed in an empty classroom, promising her that we'd be okay, that I wouldn't let Mom hurt her anymore. I hoped desperately that I could keep that promise. Laura interviewed Oliver that same afternoon. He was only 7, and the interview had to be gentler, more age-appropriate. But even he confirmed the punishments, the pressure, the fear. He told Laura about the blinking consequences and the stress of trying to be perfect. His testimony, combined with Mia's and mine, apparently painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Laura called me that evening and explained that she'd be conducting a home visit the next day, Friday, to inspect our living conditions and interview our parents. She warned me that Mom would likely be angry after the visit, that I should be prepared for consequences, but that CPS was now actively involved and monitoring the situation. The home visit happened on Friday afternoon. I was at school but got a text from a restricted number that I assume was Laura, letting me know she'd arrived at our house. I sat through my last 2 classes, completely unable to focus, imagining the confrontation happening at home. Laura interviewing Mom, asking about discipline methods, examining our study schedules and the documentation Mom kept of our achievements. Mom's shock and anger as she realized someone was questioning her parenting. Dad's surprise and defensive explanations. The house that had been our prison now being inspected by someone with authority to actually intervene. I came home to find Mom in the kitchen, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't yell or ask questions, just told me to go to my room and stay there. Dad was already home, sitting at the kitchen table, looking shell-shocked. I could hear them talking in low, intense voices as I climbed the stairs. Couldn't make out words, but could feel the anger radiating through the house. I sat on my bed waiting for the explosion, for Mom to come upstairs and confront me, but she never did. The silence was almost worse than shouting would have been. That night, Mom gathered us in the living room. All 3 of us kids sat on the couch while Mom and Dad stood facing us like we were being court-martialed. Mom explained that someone had made false accusations to Child Protective Services, that social workers had questioned her parenting methods, that our family was now under investigation. She looked directly at me when she said someone had betrayed the family's trust. She didn't accuse me explicitly, but her eyes made it clear she knew. She explained that we were all going to cooperate fully with the investigation, answer questions honestly, and demonstrate that we were a loving family with high standards. Any attempts to sabotage the family would result in severe consequences she didn't specify but implied were terrible. The message was clear. If we continued cooperating with CPS, if we confirmed the abuse, we'd face retaliation. But Mom was too smart to be explicit about it, especially now that we were under investigation. She couldn't risk being caught making threats. So instead, she created an atmosphere of implied danger, using silence and cold anger to control us. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound, expecting her to come into my room with some delayed punishment, but nothing happened. The anticipation was its own form of torture. Laura conducted follow-up interviews the next week, this time with both Mia and Oliver at a child advocacy center designed to be comfortable and non-threatening for kids. They were interviewed on video by trained specialists who could assess whether they were telling the truth or being coached. I wasn't present for those interviews, but Laura called me afterward to say both kids had confirmed the abuse in detail. She said the evidence was strong enough to move forward with a safety plan, requiring Mom to stop physical punishments and reduce academic pressure. She explained that removal from the home wasn't warranted yet because we weren't in immediate danger, but that the case would remain open with regular check-ins and monitoring. The safety plan arrived by official letter later that week, outlining specific requirements. No physical discipline of any kind. Reasonable homework expectations based on age and grade level. At least 8 hours of sleep per night for all children. Regular meal times with adequate nutrition. Weekly phone check-ins with CPS. Monthly home visits. Violation of any term could result in removal of children from the home. Mom read the letter with visible rage, barely contained behind her professional mask. She signed the acknowledgement form, but I could see her hands shaking with anger as she wrote her name. For exactly 1 week, Mom followed the safety plan perfectly. No ruler, no rice, no excessive study schedules, reasonable bedtimes, and full meals. She was performing compliance while everyone watched, proving she could be the parent CPS wanted to see. But the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me confirmed that this was temporary, strategic. She was waiting for the investigation to close, for the monitoring to lighten, for her opportunity to reassert control, and she blamed me entirely for bringing this interference into our home. Mia's mental health improved slightly during that week of reduced pressure. She started eating more, sleeping better, even smiled a few times. Oliver's tic decreased in frequency. I felt the whole house breathing slightly easier, all of us cautiously hoping that maybe things would actually change. But I knew better. I'd seen Mom's pattern of behavior over 17 years. She didn't change. She adapted and waited and found new ways to control us within whatever constraints existed. My MIT early decision response arrived in mid-December. Accepted. Full admission to one of the most prestigious engineering programs in the country. Mom's reaction was triumphant, vindicated. She announced it to everyone she knew, posted about it on social media, treated it as validation of her parenting methods. See? Her techniques worked. Her son got into MIT. The abuse wasn't abuse. It was effective preparation for success. I sat at the kitchen table holding the acceptance letter, feeling nothing. This was supposed to be a moment of joy and accomplishment. Instead, it felt like proof that her torture had succeeded in molding me into exactly what she wanted. I was her successful experiment, her justification for everything she'd done to all of us. The CPS case continued through Christmas and into January. Laura maintained weekly check-ins and conducted another home visit right before the holidays. Everything appeared fine on the surface. Mom was playing the role of reformed parent, following every rule, documenting our improved sleep and reduced study times. But at night, she'd come into my room and sit in the chair by my desk, not saying anything, just watching me in the dark. The silent intimidation was effective without being something I could report. She wasn't threatening me verbally or physically, just creating an atmosphere of menace that kept me constantly afraid. In February, Laura called to say the case would likely be closed soon. The monitoring period had shown substantial improvement, and while CPS still had concerns about Mom's parenting philosophy, there was no evidence of ongoing abuse. She asked how I was feeling about the case closure, and I told her the truth, that I didn't think anything had actually changed, that Mom was just waiting for supervision to end so she could resume her methods. Laura sounded frustrated, said she understood my concerns but couldn't keep a case open indefinitely based on fears about future behavior. Unless something new happened, unless there was fresh evidence of abuse, the case would close in March. I felt the window of protection slamming shut. In a few weeks, CPS would stop monitoring our family, and Mom would be free to retaliate for everything I'd done. The safety plan would technically remain in effect, but without regular check-ins, who would enforce it? Who would know if Mom went back to physical punishments and impossible academic pressure? We'd be right back where we started, except now Mom would be more careful to hide the evidence, more strategic about avoiding detection. And I'd be leaving for MIT in August, abandoning Mia and Oliver to whatever came next. The solution came to me during a sleepless night in late February. I couldn't stop Mom's abuse by trying to get authorities to intervene. They'd already demonstrated they weren't equipped to handle sophisticated psychological warfare disguised as high expectations. But I could document everything so thoroughly, build such an overwhelming case, that eventually the truth would be undeniable. I started recording conversations on my phone whenever Mom issued punishments or threats, backing everything up to encrypted cloud storage. I took photos of Mia's hands after any new injuries, screenshots of our study schedules, pictures of the achievement charts and grade spreadsheets covering our walls. I wrote detailed accounts of every incident with dates and times, organized evidence chronologically, built a comprehensive archive of abuse. Caleb helped me set up an anonymous email account that couldn't be traced back to me. I began forwarding evidence to that account, creating redundant backups that Mom couldn't access or destroy. Sophie Brennan, who I'd stayed friends with after math camp, provided technical assistance with encryption and security. She asked why I needed such elaborate digital protection, and I gave her a carefully edited version of the truth. She helped anyway, showing me how to hide files and cover my digital tracks. Neither of them knew the full extent of what was happening, but they could sense I was fighting something serious and offered support without demanding complete transparency. The CPS case officially closed in mid-March with a final home visit and evaluation. Laura hugged me goodbye and said to call if anything changed, but I could hear the resignation in her voice. She knew what I knew, that closing the case meant abandoning us to Mom's control. But the system had rules and timelines, and we didn't meet the threshold for ongoing intervention. We were just high-achieving kids with a strict parent, not photogenic victims with obvious scars. The abuse was too sophisticated, too embedded in legitimate concerns about education and success for CPS to continue justifying involvement. The night after the case closed, Mom violated every term of the safety plan. She gathered us in the living room and explained that the false accusations and outside interference had embarrassed the family and demonstrated our lack of loyalty and gratitude. She announced new rules effective immediately. Study times increased to 6 hours daily after school. All phones and electronics would be confiscated except for academic use. No social contact without explicit permission. Bedtimes remained reasonable, but now included mandatory reading of academic texts for 1 hour before sleep, and punishments would resume for any grades below A, any defiance, any hint of further betrayal. Then she looked at me specifically and said I would not be attending MIT. The acceptance was meaningless because she decided I hadn't earned the privilege through my behavior this year. Instead, I'd attend community college locally while living at home, proving my commitment to family before she'd consider allowing me to leave. The announcement hit like physical violence. She was taking away the one thing I'd worked for, the escape route I'd counted on, using it as punishment for trying to protect my siblings. I started to argue, but she cut me off immediately, saying the decision was final, and any further discussion would result in immediate consequences for everyone. I called Laura the next morning from school and reported every violation. She sounded tired and frustrated, said she'd reopen the investigation and conduct another home visit. But she also warned me that the system moves slowly, that Mom would likely be given another warning and another chance to comply before anything more serious happened. She asked if I felt immediately unsafe, and I said no, because the truth was, Mom's abuse was patient and calculated. She wouldn't do anything obvious or impulsive that could get her caught. She'd wear us down over time, grind us into compliance through psychological pressure and strategic punishments that left minimal evidence. The home visit happened later that week. Mom denied violating any terms of the safety plan, said I was lying out of anger about college decisions. She showed Laura the acceptance letter from MIT and explained that I'd be attending, that there had been a miscommunication. She presented reasonable study schedules and our phones, which she'd returned temporarily for the visit. She played the concerned parent dealing with a rebellious teenager who resented discipline. Laura interviewed Mia and Oliver separately, but Mom had coached them beforehand, implied terrible things would happen if they contradicted her story. My siblings, terrified and exhausted, backed up Mom's version of events. I was the only one saying anything different, and Laura's expression told me she didn't know who to believe anymore. After Laura left, Mom's rage emerged fully. She didn't hit me or even yell, just explained in a cold, quiet voice that I'd destroyed the family's reputation and stability for selfish reasons. She said I was ungrateful for everything she'd sacrificed, that I'd wasted her time and money and effort trying to make me successful. She revoked her permission for me to attend MIT, regardless of what she'd told the social worker. I destroyed her trust, and now I'd face consequences for that betrayal. Community college, living at home, continuing under her control and supervision. That was my future now. I realized I had one nuclear option left. I could release all the evidence publicly, post it online where it couldn't be hidden or denied, force accountability through public exposure rather than working within failed systems. The thought terrified me because going public meant permanent rupture with my family, meant accepting that I'd never have any relationship with Mom again, meant potentially destroying Dad's career and reputation in the process. But I was out of other options. The authorities hadn't protected us. The system had failed. The only power I had left was the truth, documented and undeniable. I spent a week preparing the release. I compiled years of evidence into a comprehensive document, organized chronologically with dates and descriptions, photos of injuries, audio recordings of threats and punishments, medical records from Mia's hospitalization, copies of our insane study schedules, screenshots of Mom's achievement tracking spreadsheets. I wrote a detailed narrative explaining the systematic abuse disguised as academic pressure, the physical and psychological torture, the failed interventions by authorities. Then I created an anonymous blog, posted everything with appropriate content warnings, and shared the link on local parenting forums and educational discussion groups under a throwaway account. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the blog had thousands of views. Comments poured in from child development experts, abuse survivors, concerned parents, horrified readers. Some accused me of exaggerating or lying, defending Mom's methods as tough love. But most recognized the abuse clearly documented in the evidence. A local journalist reached out through the blog's contact form asking for an interview. Teachers at our school started discussing the posts in faculty meetings. Someone forwarded the link to the hospital where Mom worked, and her colleagues began asking questions about the woman they thought they knew. Mom discovered the blog on a Friday evening when a colleague called to ask if she was okay, mentioning they'd seen some disturbing material online. I was in my room when I heard her scream, a sound of pure rage I'd never heard before. She came upstairs and threw open my door, her face twisted with fury. She knew immediately that I was responsible, that I'd been the one gathering evidence and building the case against her. She demanded I take down the blog, remove all the content, fix the damage I'd caused. I refused quietly, explaining that the truth was public now and couldn't be hidden. She slapped me, hard enough to snap my head sideways, the first time she'd hit me in years. Then she left my room, and I heard her on the phone with Dad, her voice shrill with panic. That night I packed a bag with essentials and left through my bedroom window. I'd planned an escape route months ago, just in case, and now I activated it. Caleb's family agreed to let me stay with them temporarily, no questions asked. I texted Mia and Oliver from Caleb's house, letting them know I was safe but couldn't come home. I told them to call 911 if Mom hurt them, gave them Laura's direct number at CPS, promised I'd keep fighting for them, even from outside the house. Then I blocked Mom's number and tried to sleep on Caleb's couch, while my phone buzzed constantly, with calls from Dad trying to negotiate my return. The blog continued spreading through the weekend. Local news picked up the story, calling it an investigation into extreme academic pressure and potential child abuse in high-achieving families. They didn't name our family specifically, but included enough details that anyone who knew us could identify the situation. Mom's hospital received multiple complaints, demanding investigation into her fitness as a pediatric surgeon if she was abusing her own children. The school district launched their own inquiry into why teachers and counselors hadn't intervened more effectively. The story became a referendum on parenting culture and achievement pressure, and the line between high expectations and abuse. On Monday, CPS showed up at our house with police officers and an emergency removal order. Mia and Oliver were taken into protective custody based on the new evidence and the pattern of violations. They were placed with my Aunt Diane, Mom's sister, who'd offered to take them after seeing the blog. Diane had always suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known the full extent until the evidence went public. She called me at Caleb's house sobbing and apologizing for not doing more to protect us, promising she'd keep my siblings safe. I cried with relief, knowing they were finally out of Mom's control. Mom faced immediate suspension from the hospital pending investigation into the abuse allegations. The medical board opened an inquiry into whether her treatment of her own children violated professional ethics standards for pediatric surgeons. Dad's accounting firm put him on leave as well, not wanting the negative publicity associated with the scandal. Our family imploded spectacularly and publicly, exactly as I'd feared and exactly as was necessary. Sometimes the only way to stop systematic abuse is to burn down the structures protecting it. I stayed with Caleb's family for 3 weeks, while lawyers and social workers and investigators sorted through everything. My Aunt Diane was approved as temporary guardian for Mia and Oliver after home studies and background checks. She wanted to take me too, but I was 17 and close enough to 18 that I had more options. Caleb's parents offered to let me stay through graduation and summer if needed. I had my MIT acceptance and could leave for college in August regardless of what Mom wanted. For the first time in my life, I had choices and agency, and the possibility of a future mom didn't control. The criminal investigation moved slowly. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence, but struggled with how to charge mom. Physical abuse was documented but sporadic, not meeting the threshold for assault charges they felt confident pursuing. Emotional abuse and psychological torture were harder to prosecute, more subjective, requiring expert testimony about developmental harm. Eventually, they filed charges for child endangerment and criminal negligence, lesser charges, but ones they thought they could prove. Mom hired an expensive defense attorney who argued that strict parenting wasn't criminal, that high expectations didn't constitute abuse, that I was a troubled teen with an agenda against my accomplished mother. The case generated intense public debate. Some people defended Mom, saying parents should be allowed to push their children academically without government interference, that the real abuse was removing kids from a stable home over discipline differences. Others recognized the documented torture clearly and demanded accountability. I read the comment sections and op-eds and social media arguments with a mix of validation and frustration. Even with overwhelming evidence, people couldn't agree on whether what Mom did was abuse or just controversial parenting. The ambiguity revealed how normalized academic pressure had become, how many families operated on similar principles, just slightly less extremely. In May, I turned 18 and gained legal adulthood. The timing was perfect, allowing me to testify at Mom's trial without needing parental permission or guardian approval. The trial itself was brief, just 3 days of testimony and evidence. I spent 6 hours on the stand describing years of abuse, while Mom sat at the defense table looking small and defeated. Mia and Oliver testified via video link from Diane's house, their faces pixelated to protect their identities. Medical experts confirmed that Mia's collapse and ongoing anxiety were consistent with chronic stress and abuse. The school counselor testified about the reports and concerns that had gone ignored for years. The defense argued that Mom was a dedicated parent whose methods were unconventional but not criminal, that our family's high achievement was proof her system worked. It pointed to my MIT acceptance, to my perfect GPA and test scores, claiming I'd benefited from her discipline. The prosecution countered that success didn't justify torture, that good outcomes didn't erase the documented harm. The judge listened to both sides carefully, clearly struggling with where to draw legal lines around parenting decisions. The verdict came back guilty on all counts of child endangerment and criminal negligence. The judge sentenced Mom to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, mandatory parenting classes, and psychological evaluation. The medical board permanently revoked her license to practice medicine, stating that someone who systematically abused her own children could not be trusted with other people's children. Mom's entire identity and career collapsed in that courtroom, the cost of years of cruelty finally coming due. I felt no triumph watching her led away in handcuffs, just exhaustion and hollow relief. Dad sat in the gallery crying quietly, broken by the dissolution of everything he'd enabled but never quite stopped. Diane hugged me outside the courthouse while news cameras filmed from a respectful distance. Mia and Oliver were safe at her house, starting to heal slowly with therapy and stability, and the freedom to be imperfect kids. I'd survived and escaped and brought some measure of justice to a situation that had seemed hopeless for so long. Graduation happened 2 weeks later. I walked across the stage as valedictorian, my perfect GPA maintained despite everything, and accepted my diploma from administrators who looked uncomfortable with my presence. I was both a success story and a cautionary tale for the district that had failed to protect me. In my valedictorian speech, I talked about the difference between achievement and fulfillment, between success that comes through joy and success extracted through fear. I dedicated my MIT acceptance to Mia and Oliver, saying they deserved childhoods and happiness more than any letter grade. The applause was loud but awkward, everyone present knowing the context behind my words. MIT orientation started in August, and I arrived in Cambridge feeling lighter than I'd felt in years. For the first time, I was learning because I wanted to, not because someone would punish me if I didn't perform perfectly. I changed my major from engineering to psychology, interested now in understanding family dynamics and childhood trauma and how systems fail vulnerable people. Mom's vision for my life died completely, replaced by one I chose for myself, based on my actual experiences and interests and goals. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying, requiring me to figure out who I was beyond the achievement machine Mom had created. Mia and Oliver are still with Aunt Diane, adjusting to normal childhood expectations and discovering interest beyond academics. Mia wants to be an artist now, spending hours drawing and painting things that make her happy. Oliver plays soccer and video games and brings home B's and C's without fear. They're in therapy, working through years of trauma, learning that their worth isn't determined by grades, that love shouldn't hurt or come with conditions. Diane calls me regularly with updates, and I visit during breaks, watching my siblings slowly become whole people instead of terrified performers. 6 months after the trial, sitting in a campus coffee shop studying developmental psychology, I realized I'd escaped and survived and even achieved some justice. The cost was enormous, the scars permanent, but we were free. Sometimes revolution requires burning everything down to stop the cycle. At our house, you got straight A's or you got a punishment. Now there is no house, no us, just 3 kids scattered and healing, learning to measure success by peace instead of perfection. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.